The world is evolving at a faster pace than ever before. And as we begin the path to recovery after worldwide disruption, this podcast explores how the design industry can adapt to changing expectations and create a better future for your businesses and your consumers. I'm your host, Peter Marion, and you're listening to Create Tomorrow, the WGSN podcast. How we eat has changed tremendously over the first half of this year, as enforced lockdowns have led to increased food stockpiling and most of the world eating all of their meals at home, and this is leading to new attitudes towards food. Today, we are exploring the shifts that are taking place in the food and drink sector and what will be the winning strategies for success in a post-coronavirus world. I'm joined by two of my newer colleagues on WGSN who are among the busiest people in the business right now as they're on the brink of launching our new food and drink forecasting product. I'm super excited to introduce you to Jen Creevy, who's the head of WGSN Food and Drink. Hey, Jen.
Hi, Peter.
Have you picked up any new food habits during the lockdown?
Well, Peter, I'm one of those people that has been trying to recreate restaurant quality food at home. So I've had my fair share of disasters, to be honest. But next weekend, it's my birthday. So I've ordered a meal kit from Chef Michael O'Hare, and I'm going to do an Instagram live cook along with him. So I'll let you know how that one goes.
Oh, that sounds amazing. That's actually been something that I've been trying to get my friends together to do through this. We also have Claire Lancaster, who is a strategist on food and drink. Hey, Claire.
Hi, Peter.
And what new food habits have you picked up?
So like Jen, I've also been cooking a lot more at home, but I've also really gotten into pickling recently. We're just literally pickling everything in our household that we can find, doing it ourselves in little jars and with vinegar and stuff. It's been pretty fun.
So before we get into the main content of this episode, let's talk about the new product, WGSN Food and Drink. What is it and who are we hoping to help with this new content?
So, Peter, as listeners will probably be quite familiar with WGSN, they will know that we've had over 20 years' experience in fashion, lifestyle, consumer insights forecasting. And now we're extending those skills into the food and drink sector. We've created a platform that will enable clients to get ahead of change and develop products and strategies that will resonate with consumers in the future. So just some of our content will include consumer insights, tech, health, cuisine, flavour, ingredients, packaging and sustainability. So we're really very excited for the launch and to share our content with the food and drink sector.
So let's dive in, I guess. So we've seen so many headlines around how eating patterns have changed in recent months, from the rise in sourdough baking, which is one of the things that I've been doing, through to stock issues in supermarkets. What are some of the trends that we're seeing in this space that are emerging as a result of the coronavirus?
So one of the key things that we've been seeing is the rise of what we're calling food as medicine. So consumers before coronavirus were already turning to food and supplements as tools for physical and mental well-being, and looking for ingredients that could give them sort of reparative powers. So coronavirus has obviously put these health concerns really front and center and brought a real renewed focus on eating well and looking to boost our immunity through food. So once we start going back to our new normal, brands are going to have a real opportunity to meet these sort of increased consumer desires for well-being. And it's going to help brands to remove that sort of chore status of their health and make it easier to incorporate nutrition, because consumers are really going to be seeking that out.
So when you say that, so does that mean that people are going to be looking for joy in that idea of food as medicine?
Yeah, I think they're going to be looking for things that they can eat that's going to bring them both mental well-being and physical well-being.
And in terms of a strategy perspective, what sorts of cuisines or products are likely to grow as a result of it?
So one thing we're really focused on is the global probiotics market. So that was already projected for massive growth through the next couple of years, and that was just before the virus hit. And now consumers are definitely going to increasingly seek these products. It's really accelerated that demand. And one of the biggest areas of growth in the probiotics market is functional foods and beverages. So those are sort of foods that have an additional function that are built into it. So adding ingredients or something that makes regular ingredients have something a little bit special. So we can look at things like functional sort of drink shots and beverages that look to improve your gut health with things like live cultures, because there's a lot of increased interest in consumer education around how gut and mental well-being are linked and how you can really improve resistance to sort of things like common respiratory infections and the flu, especially through products that we see incorporating ingredients like turmeric, orange, and apple and lemon, and things that you would really associate with getting an immunity boost. And that's especially true for things that have vitamin C, which a lot of health professionals have been suggesting a link between vitamin C deficiency and the severity of coronavirus. So this look for wellness foods is also going to give rise to things like chaga, which is an immunity-boosting mushroom, or hemp-infused teas. And then we also expect to see the rise of really dedicated well-being food programs in grocers. So just before the virus hit, U.S. grocery chain Kroger was testing a food as medicine program where doctors are making dietary recommendations to diabetes patients and directing them to nutrition experts inside Kroger supermarkets so that they could buy food in line with doctors' orders.
And Jen, what trend are you seeing emerge as part of this accelerator shift?
So I want to pick up on the rise of cooking in the home and home delivery. So what started out as necessity, as people were told not to leave their homes, obviously led to a surge in online deliveries. But as we all know, those delivery slots were very hard to come by. So lots of different brands, manufacturers and other suppliers have been quick to develop their own direct-to-consumer offerings. But food delivered to the home is not just about online deliveries. It's essential supplies, and we need to fulfill this new consumer mindset that has started to emerge. So that consumer mindset has really been around comfort and the need to take control. So cooking and prepared foods is comforting. It makes people feel less anxious. It helps them take control of a situation whereas everything else in the world is quite out of control at the moment. So it's really about a sense of self-expression, and brands and suppliers are really switching onto this and will definitely want to tap into it for the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we've all been talking about across all of the different platforms through this, is really about that desire for control and being able to express themselves in new ways through this period. As we start to think about this shift from a longer term perspective around food being delivered towards the home and people cooking at home, I mean, what's that going to mean from like a cuisine perspective? Because obviously, if you think about sort of some of the high-end food industry and the restaurant industry, those sorts of products don't necessarily travel so well, or they don't necessarily work for a home cook. So what sort of shifts are we likely to see as a result of that?
So what we'll see is the brands and the businesses that will succeed are helping consumers create new and exciting dishes at home. So as you mentioned, some of the foods don't travel so well, but we've seen restaurants and brands that are focusing on those foods that actually do travel well in their meal kits. So there's certainly lots in London that I've seen. Bistrotech, for example, has focused on the ingredients that can be delivered close to their restaurant. So what we'll see is meal kits with a certain amount of prep done for the customer, because the consumer wants to feel like they are creating the meal, but they also want a certain amount of preparation done for them. We'll also see brands do well that have got signature dishes or signature sauces that consumers are obviously missing right now because the restaurants are shut. So going direct to consumer for those would be a good idea. What else are we seeing? We're seeing brands bringing a bit of theatre to the home as well. So delivering all the components for their special cocktails, those sorts of things will do really well. And lastly, I think we'll see the rise of essential boxes. So these would be boxes of products that you don't really need to think about all the time, but you definitely still need. So tins, that sort of product. So we've seen, for example, Heinz in the UK create essential boxes. And then more recently, we've seen Pepsi create 2 websites for direct-to-consumer essential boxes for their products where you can get bundles of its products. So I think those are the sorts of things that we'll see on the rise.
One of the things I really liked in that shift was seeing Heinz move towards, they're almost like care boxes with some of the packaging that they've been using. But then as we look at this in a longer term view, if this sort of trend takes off as those consumer brands move to direct to consumer, what will that mean for traditional grocery players?
Yeah, well, we've seen all of the perceived barriers that some consumers had to ordering food online have now gone. So they'll definitely continue to do this post-pandemic. So I think the supermarkets will benefit from this, but absolutely, you're completely right. The choice has increased phenomenally over these last couple of weeks. So we will see a rise in direct-to-consumer, manufacturers, local businesses, and consumers will be overwhelmed with choice. So I think what grocers will need to do is create that loyalty and that connection with customers, because there is too much choice for everyone. So why do you choose one over the other? So the loyalty will be really, really important. And I think the other thing for the grocery sector is the role of the grocery store. So already we're seeing social distancing in stores. So how will they look in the future? How will consumers want to shop? All of that will change dramatically.
Moving on to another topic that we're all very interested in the moment, and one that's obviously very complex now that COVID-19 has come into the picture, because we were already seeing some really interesting shifts take place around it. But what's going to happen for sustainability as a result of COVID-19 and all of these new behaviours that are emerging?
So, Peter, this is a really complicated area. Obviously, hygiene is top of the agenda right now for all consumers, and rightly so. And businesses have already responded to this by banning reusable cups or bringing plastic bags back, and extra packaging we've seen on products. All of those things, of course, reassure the customer that the products are completely hygienic. But sustainability is not going to go away in the long term, and brands are now faced with what's a dual challenge, essentially. So making sure hygiene expectations are met, but also that their products tick the box in terms of sustainability. But the opportunity here is wide open for brands, and they need to act fast to meet these new consumer needs. So the issue of sustainability has not gone away. It's just the fact that hygiene is also top of the agenda now. So brands have to deal with both.
And in terms of people spending more time at home, has that really changed attitudes around things like, I guess, food waste and things like that?
I think that's one of the long-term effects that we'll see that's actually a positive. People are really understanding food waste now and the need not to create that waste. So in the long term, I think, while of course nobody wants to be stuck at home, I think we'll realise that the foods that we eat are precious. And I think that will be a long-term effect, a long-term change that consumers will have now.
One of the really important pieces of research that's going to be coming out alongside the launch of the new platform is the consumer personas for 2022. Now, there are 5 in the report, but we only have time today, unfortunately, to go into depth on one. So, Claire, tell me which one you'd like to talk about today.
Yeah, so when we were looking to develop these consumer persona research, we were really looking beyond age and demographic groups and looking at those real consumer attitude shifts. So in 2022, one of the big shifts that we're going to see is towards valuing and exploring food self-sufficiency, which is really touching on what Jen was just saying, with a real focus for consumers on resourcefulness and preparedness. So we call this persona the cultivator. And this is a real buyer profile who we're seeing as looking to plant roots in their communities with a real move towards localization, as well as being prepared and keeping their pantries well stocked.
And in terms of this, like, what sorts of key foods will be important for this consumer persona?
So doing it yourself and being self-sufficient is really key for this persona, but brands do have a big role to play in enabling that self-reliance. So things like DIY kits that offer tips and materials for things like from scratch making and growing are really great. And then a bit of what I was talking about earlier as well, with a resurgence on things like preservation and pickling and brining and canning and fermentation stations, as well as the classic sourdough bread and kombucha starters, vinegar mothers, as well as grow your own garden seeds for produce, and as well as that, energy and resource efficient sort of hydroponic gardens for growing indoor greens. So really things that can bolster that feeling of security and preparedness. So things like ambient and shelf-stable foods that can last quite a long time. And for fresh and prepared goods, we expect to see an interest in those sorts of labels like local, organic, biodynamic, as well as seasonal and low carbon, which can sort of suggest that foods traveled a short distance from where it was made to where it's consumed. And that also, of course, reduces its carbon footprint, which is great for sustainability concerns.
And it all sort of seems to give off, I guess, quite a nostalgic vibe and, that kind of, lumberjack persona that kind of emerged in the post-2008 financial crisis. And I was just wondering, what kind of a role does technology play in this consumer profile and this consumer persona?
Yeah, so as you say, it's easy to pull out that sort of homemaker feel that we can get from these people because they are making in the home. But one thing that's really distinct about this persona is they have a much greater reliance on technology than we saw after the first sort of economic crash in the 2008 era. So the cultivators are really bringing in this new era of homemaking with the help of consumer electronics and peer-to-peer commerce and social apps that help them to develop those really strong community ties. And they're also looking for consumer electronic solutions like things that promise to upgrade their attempts to make things in the home. So we look at brands like, there's a great brand that I saw at the Consumer Electronics Show this January called Pico Brew, and it's basically an all-grain countertop appliance. It's just about the size of a toaster, and it lets amateur brewers make their own beer in their house, but to a really high standard, unlike before.
And what would that look like traditionally in the past? Like, I'm sorry, I don't know anything about home brewing, but doesn't it usually take up a whole garage or something?
Yeah, I think it's a lot more complex. It requires a lot more space, and the product is probably a lot worse, to be honest.
So technology is playing a real role in helping these personas move forward. And now to move on to our last section of the show, one of the things I'd like to ask you both is, what one thing should businesses be doing both in the short term and in the long term to help succeed into the future in the post-pandemic environment?
So, Peter, in the short term, brands really need to understand the change in consumer mindset. So the coronavirus pandemic is the biggest disruption to business that we've seen for many, many years. And it has, or as we've already talked about, accelerated many of the trends we've already forecast at WGSN. And while this new world is definitely filled with uncertainty, there are many, many opportunities for brands in terms of new product development. But understanding that consumer mindset is key in the short term. In the long term, what we'll see is consumers reassess where their food comes from and the implications around health and the environment. So we already know that our global food system is unsustainable, and the shortages and disruption to the supply chain from the pandemic threw that into the consumer psyche. So brands need to really understand what a sustainable system of the future looks like for food and start to act now in order to meet that consumer demand.
And Claire, what are your long-term and short-term suggestions?
So in the short term, I think brands are really going to want to quickly invest in food as a solution for well-being, whether that's in probiotics or specific ingredients, to really help meet that emerging need and real consumer concern. And in the long term, brands are going to want to look towards new subscription models and sort of really make that pivot towards direct-to-consumer. And they're also going to want to look to support our cultivators' persona, who want things like tech solutions that are both affordable and practical and quite easy to learn, but allow them to really expand their food horizons.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I really cannot wait to see the new platform launch. I'm really excited for you guys.
Thanks, Peter. We're very excited too.
Thanks for listening to the WGSN podcast. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, then please subscribe to us. You can find us on all major podcast platforms. And if you really like what you heard, then please leave us a rating and review. It really does help us get the word out there. And if you're interested in what we've been talking about today, then please head over to WGSN.com to find out how you can get access to much more insight and analysis. And if you're already a WGSN subscriber, head over to the site where we've pulled together all of our research on the food sector in the current and post-COVID world with key points from this podcast in one handy report. Thank you so much to our guests for being here, and I'd like to thank our show producer, Roland Burdenham. And again, thank you for being here. Please stay well and healthy, and we'll see you next time.